Hello, everyone. Welcome, esteemed guest panelists. Um, my name is Graham Nolan. I welcome everyone to another edition of the monthly Do the Work town hall meetings. I'm so excited for everyone who could be here today, including our guests and including folks who are watching live and recorded. So my name is Graham Nolan, he, him pronouns, based in Austin, Texas. Um, and then, one second, I'm getting a production note, is all. Um, I am not sure how to do this, but I will sort this while we do introductions. So I'm going to talk for just a couple more minutes just to make sure that we're level set. Um, so I am he, him pronouns, Austin, Texas. By day, my day job is that I'm a PR consultant in the advertising and marketing worlds. And then my gay job is that I'm the co-chair of Do the Work, which is the premier national platform for LGBTQ people in advertising and marketing. So we have we just make sure that this conversation continues year round. We're a volunteer-based community. So if anyone wants to get involved, they can check us out at dothework.com. That we'll have more about that at the end. And we are here on our monthly series to continue to talk about the issues that are, we're getting into some more. I don't want to, niche sort of is always sort of funny because it sort of reduces stature, I think, sometimes. But like we also know there's power in niche. We get into depth on topics that are a little bit more specialized than what you'll ever see in other web series and other conference stages as it regards advertising and marketing and the LGBTQ plus community. So not only are we examining different aspects of the LGBTQ plus community rainbow, but we also get into more areas of marketing, sports marketing, music marketing, etc. And in this case, it's going to be about generational marketing. So this time around, we've got an interesting topic, which is what do we know about Gen Alpha queer people? So we know that Gen Z continues to be a hot focus in Adland, but don't get too comfortable because the Gen Alphas, people born after 2010, are creeping into brands' radars and budgets. We know about this generation that they are more likely to probably to identify as LGBTQ plus than ever because we know that Gen Z self-identified 22% LGBTQ plus compared to 10% of millennials and 2% of boomers. But who knows? I personally think that generational marketing is a really interesting concept because, and we're going to get into this in general. These terms get thrown around, but we talk so much, especially in our community, about personal identity, and then we talk about it everyone in broad sweeps just based on when they were born. Hey, but we do it with astrology too. So, there's levels to all this stuff. So, while I am going through and trying to fix this technical error, I would like to invite the people to on screen to invite them to introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with Anthony. If you could please share your background and some background or some details on your identity as it's relevant to this conversation and how your work fits into this kind of discussion.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is A. Anthony, Ph.D. My pronouns are they, them, and you can call me Anthony. I'm a cultural insights strategist, looking to do more interesting consulting, and I'm also in the world of multicultural market research. I specialize in Black and Latinx audiences, as well as LGBTQIA plus audiences and consumer insights. And I'm really excited about teen consumer behavior, so 13 to 17-year-olds. I am a mixed race Latinx, transgender, non-binary person, and I live in Philadelphia.
Very cool. Josh, you're up.
Nice. Hi, everyone. My name is Josh Weaver. I use they, them pronouns. I'm proudly Black, non binary, Libra sun, Aries rising for the astrology component. Um, I currently, my day job is I'm the campaign director at the Advertising Council working on an LGBTQ plus equity campaign. Priorly, I was the VP of marketing at the Trevor Project. And before that, I was the director of media at Vice Media, a millennial mainstay. Um, Besides that, I vibe code on the side, focusing on creating projects and tools and using AI for the good of our community. And ultimately, why youth youth marketing and youth consumer behavior is important to me is the fact that the youth are our future. I know it's cliche, Whitney Houston said it, but it's true. And being able to understand what makes them tick, but also how to authentically message to them is such a constituent part of what I do. So I'm really eager and excited to chat through this topic today.
Teach them well and let them lead the way is a big line
Exactly.
from the new Superman movie. So
Oh,
this
wow.
all speaks to me. Nick, you're up.
Thank you. Hey everyone, I'm Nick Allam, London born and raised, as you would tell from the accent, but based in Los Angeles for the last 10 years, she, her. I'm Gen X, I'm bi, and in my working life, I'm a cultural anthropologist and experiential creative director. And my gay job is that I'm consultation and creative director of Do the Work. And what led me to this discussion as a cultural anthropologist, obviously I'm naturally attracted to it, but I'm particularly interested in fandoms, youth culture's discovery of old technology, their discovery of subcultures, physical media, nightlife, and most of all, real life experiences. It's an interesting toggle switch we're coming up on between, you know, a life immersed from almost birth in AI and digital technology, and what actually happens when you leave your house or put your phone down. So this is going to be a fascinating one, and it's great to be on this panel with you guys.
I cannot thank y'all enough for lending your expertise to this discussion. I'm actually really glad that you're all strategists who do not shy away from culture or dive into it on a daily basis. I think that you all represent a lot of different cultural immersions, a lot of different identity aspects. So I know that y'all will bring your full range of aspects to this discussion. I also just want to take a moment to say thank you for doing the work that you do outside of this in the industry, because as we constantly talk about how important it is that we are in the room, your voices in the room are making some big, obviously all the partners that you listed, and all the experiences that you work in and all the areas, it's so important that your voices are there. So thank you for bringing that outside in, but then taking this inside conversation and taking it back out to the world and making it happen in the industry. It's very important. All right, so now I want to get into a little bit of the big picture, which is what generation is currently dominating marketer attention. I have been in the industry for 25 years, and I feel like the second one generation sort of like enters the chat, they get full focus. And we forget about the last ones, and we sort of act like, they're, has-beens, and that's not where the future of our investment goes. Nick, you have talked before, I think like even on here, but like casually personally about how like Gen X is like the forgotten generation. It's like so funny. We're like focusing on the oldest folks and the youngest folks, and the people in the middle get lost. So where do y'all see the marketer attention lying right now, and where do you think it should be? Are we early for alpha, or is now the exact right time to start making that attention shift?
Well, I think the focus is firmly on Gen Z. I mean, it's unavoidable, it's inescapable, it's everywhere all at once. Um, and what's missing from all of that, and I'm proudly Gen X, and I'm going to rep for my generation, is that we are nowhere in any conversation. Nobody's talking to us. Nobody's talking about us. We're not dead, far from it. And it's funny that in artistic industries, I'm thinking specifically of female opera singers and male movie directors. When they hit their 50s, they're considered to be at the peak of their powers. The same does not go for how the industry views Gen X people. And
I was
that
going
needs
to say
to
this, by the way. Aren't aren't most like agency leaders and brand leaders now probably in the age range where they are also Gen X, but then do not cater to their own generation?
correct.
That is deeply ironic and a little bit tragic.
Yes, and it's interesting that, so, almost everything I'm seeing out there is talking about Gen Z being nostalgic for an era that they weren't alive for. Well, that was my era. I lived it. I worked it. Like We should be bringing people together. What was it like? What did it smell like? What did it feel like? What was the vibe in the crowd? All of that stuff, not just, oh, look, here is, here's a Liquid Death can with Ozzy Osbourne on the front. God rest his soul. But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
So that's okay.
absolutely.
And then, I mean, also, and the okay boomer thing, like, please, too many times. But the boomers themselves, the silent generation, again, I don't, other than retirement plans, insurance, Metamucil, all of that. I don't see a lot of innovative or culturally relevant marketing to that generation either. And millennials, at the moment, it's all about the millennial parent. But again, what about millennial currency?
Yeah.
How does that generation actually live within culture, generate culture, absorb culture in this time and place? Because they're not all parents, you know. And
Jeff,
then
I'm going to
Gen
ask.
Alpha it's, I mean, I just did a quick scrape on Google before we joined this session, and it's bubbling up, of course, but it's being talked about in the framework of Gen Z and Gen Alpha, very similar. And
Curious,
I
I'm
think
curious.
conversations like this is a chance to start blowing that apart, basically.
As the rest of y'all respond, and maybe Nick, you have something to say on this as well, is um are we potentially in a place where they're not getting the attention yet because we can't get a lot of data on them because they're not of the appropriate age to start
Sure.
gathering data on them? That's a big part of it. Okay. Anthony, Josh, where do you see the attention?
I think the attention is firmly on Gen Z. They dominate, if not run the zeitgeist right now in terms of culture. It's very kin to, I think, millennials about a decade ago. Like I said, I worked at Vice Media, and during my tenure there, we were the darlings in terms of being able to capture millennial audiences and being able to really help define in so many ways what youth is, and in a very, I would say, prescriptive way, but nonetheless. But Gen Z today really represent a stronghold. They have a lot of money. They're worth, I want to say, I think the stat that I pulled from HBR is around 12 trillion by 2030. So they're where the wallets are right now. Not to say that millennials don't have the currency, as Nick says, but I think that there's something novel about being able to capture youth money. And a lot of brands want to do so because that's the way to build brand equity in so many ways and get some of that currency that the youth kind of are able to hold just by virtue of their youth. And I in so many ways think Gen Alpha will hold that space eventually. I don't think that they hold it right now. I think that they're young, and that's part of the reason. I think the other part of it is that a lot of where Gen Alpha's influences, and I think we'll talk about this later, but it's through the parental unit.
Yeah.
And so they're more part and parcel of the family unit, the household, how we're targeting households versus, them kind of coming into the fore as individuals and individual consumers.
Yeah, I know we're going to dive into that later, but it's very apt to discuss now in terms of like, where they're getting any focus is in the context of that unit. Anthony, you could defy all the expectations here and say that the attention isn't on Gen Z, but would love to, if you're in agreement, would love to know any additional context on why you think that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would agree, all the attention from brands is really on Gen Z. But I would say all of the linguistic attention, especially on TikTok, is on Gen Alpha. I think
Mhm.
Gen Alpha is having a very
Ah,
big push with the kind of lingo and the words that they're using and the kind of the ways in which they're having conversations. And I think that all the linguists, especially within, like, there'll be one of those posts that's like Gen Z slang versus Gen Alpha slang. When I say blah, you say, whatever. And I think there's already a rift between like an in language and out of language. Like if you're cool, you're like 11 years old, essentially. But I think that, something I was talking about with Nick earlier today is really thinking about the pull of the, I'm going to get myself a little treat. And I think that's actually just a socio-political, socioeconomic question, right? So I think that if you're looking for people with disposable income who may or may not be able to afford to buy a house in the major city or not so major city that they live in, maybe they want to buy a $30 to $100 something from Pop Mart, we'll say,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
I think that that's a lesson I would say that sadly maybe Gen Z learned from millennials and maybe millennials invented. I'm not quite sure. But I think that there is something about capitalizing on the small treat, like the under $50 item and its coolness factor that's really kind of a big market for this particular generation. But I will say, and think about generations work, I think we're really interested in life stages, right? So I think it's not new for marketing or advertising or brands to focus on people in high school or in their college years or in the next 2 to 3 years post college, whatever generation we want to call it. That's a time in which people are deciding what are they about? What are their values? What are they into? They somehow discovered a band, that they're really into that band or this shoe or whatever. And I wouldn't say that's particular to any generation so much as
Mhm.
our continual investment in youth culture.
It's interesting to look at that through a life stage lens, but and we'll get more into the linguistics and how that defines all of this. But you know, it's I think anyone's sort of there's both the comparison of, you know, between my generation and another generation, and then there's very frequently a comparison of life stage compared to what that generation went through. All the by the time, you know, I was 30, I had this and this and this. And like, you know, my dad used to say that to me. And I'm just like, yeah, I don't want any of those things. So it's like it's interesting to look at it like both from like age and life stage vantage points. I do want to know your thoughts on whether or not these sorts are these generational sort of insights too broad to do us any good. You're all people who dive in your work into very specific subcultures. Josh, I think significant with the ad council work is like specific purposes and like that being how people define themselves. We also know that like, you know, I consider myself a cis gay man, but I might even define myself even more powerfully as an X-Men fan or as a Gen Xer, right? So, wondering what if how helpful you think the generational marketing approach is at all, and what the pros and cons are of looking at people in such broad strokes.
Well, it's hard to market surgically. And what I mean by that is when you're talking about and when you're trying to make an impact on certain audiences, in so many ways do have to make assumptions based on a broader strokes sort of cohort. Looking at sort of, what I do currently at the Ad Council in terms of LGBTQ plus equality, one of the things that's really important for us is making sure that we're finding what we call confused and distance, but this is going to be your movable middle or your squishy middle, the people that, sort of believe generally in tenets of equity, but don't really dole it out, particularly for LGBTQ plus people. This group contains cohorts of all ages, but what makes them sort of tentative about equity, what are the barriers for them in terms of accepting LGBTQ plus people? They're different. Um, for instance, when we look at youth today, we look at um, Gen Z boys and all of the rhetoric around how Gen Z men today are, quote unquote, lonelier than ever, or quote unquote, have difficulties with finding and building community. I'm using quotes because I'm not the actual qualitative expert in the room, but
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is being able to understand those sort of ethnographic insights on an age-based level allows us to permeate our messaging in ways um, that is effective, and we see that in the results. However, is that the approach that I think is the ideal? I think it's one that's the realistic approach. However, if we were able to surgically, target and create messaging for individuals, it would be much different. And maybe in the future with AI and all of the different things that are going to be at our disposal, it will be that way. But right now, in so many ways, you do have to take a broader strokes approach to marketing, and just to make it effective and to make it scalable, and repeatable. Yeah.
That's what represents to brands that there is millions of people in a group that could be there for sales, right? So that does help. I will say it's really interesting that I am starting spoiler a podcast about friendship, specifically as a antidote to the loneliness epidemic. And yeah, as I've done my research and done my strategy on who my audience is, I can't ignore age and a very specific generational or sort of or a specific yet broad generational difference. So yeah, that's really interesting. Anyone else on the pros and cons of just like looking at people and actually something that came up during our prep call was how we're looking at these generations as people and how we're looking at them as consumers, which is two very different things.
Mhm. Yes, indeed, it is.
And Nick, before you start, I just want to acknowledge that Monty has made it into the call. I don't know if everyone sees the adorable little dog in the background, but I always have to call it out because I think it's good luck. Go ahead.
Yes, of course, you're saying exactly right. I think the pros of looking at it generationally for me is looking for the patterns, but also the outliers. If there is any true progression from a cultural lens, and what is iconic for that generation, but also what's iconic contextually within that generation, because iconic doesn't mean what it used to mean, but you have to go deeper into in what realm are you talking about iconicry. And then I think the cons of it is obviously, and Graham, we've talked about this before, is that marketing has no problem dividing people.
Yes.
No problem whatsoever. And interesting in particularly now when bringing people together is absolutely, critical. But in that, the cons of looking at specific generations, I'll say it once again, Gen X gets left out completely. And the okay boomerism thing has taken hold so much that voices of people Gen X and older are seen as just not valuable to the marketing or the cultural conversation, when I would argue the exact opposite, particularly because of passing on lived experience, oral tradition, information about things that happened before, both for inspiration, but also for adaptation in a time where everything is reboot, remake, etc. How can, and let's call it the queer canon, particularly of media and culture and entertainment, how can that be shared with younger generations for education and enlightenment, but also to inspire whatever creative endeavors they're doing? And I think to my mind, marketers struggle with whether you want to call it intergenerational, multi-generational marketing, because they see it as a big amorphous mass. And to your point, Josh, about surgical marketing, it's like, how do you do surgical marketing when you're talking to a wide range of people? My answer to that is, well, what are their passion points? Like, what brings people together across those generations, and target things that way. So
But and by the way, in terms of that, rough dichotomy of seeing them as people versus consumers, what I'm just inferring is that you are a fan of understanding them as people first, and that you have to sort of go to that place before you see them as consumers. So
absolutely,
steps to the process.
absolutely. What is the life, not the lifestyle? How do daily rituals and activities and time with your family, and what's considered private time or personal time, how does that shape what people are interested in? Everything is consuming content at the moment. Whatever happened to watching a movie or listening to music?
Yeah.
There's a very big difference. And I think, it's always been kind of my soapbox. But if you took consumer as a word, if it didn't exist anymore and we were just using people, I think the industry would be radically different than what it is, because reducing people to data points and consumption habits and all the rest of it as a marker of who they are as a complete human being,
Yeah.
I think is disastrous.
Yeah.
Um,
They are people who make purchase decisions. They are never consumers because that's never their primary label, and they would never say, I am a consumer.
right, exactly right.
Interesting. Okay. So, um, Anthony, do you have anything to share there? And also, I think that this is I think that we had surprise to our viewers. We prepare for these. I think this is sort of a topic that we've found related to more of that language stuff. I'm wondering if there's anything else that we want to sort of explore in terms of like, how we're seeing these people relative to language and the pros and cons of diving into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can dive into that. And I think that Josh would probably want to add some things about language, I believe. But yeah, I think that the question for me is like, how are we taking a humanist approach to how we understand consumers and consumer behavior and the kind of insights that we're pulling? How are we understanding people not only as LGBT, but having likes, dislikes, personalities, values that are important to them? And so I guess my question is really just thinking out what have we learned, almost like retroactively taking a look back on Gen Z. What have we learned from Gen Z might be a more important set of information, both qualitative and quantitative, to think about the kind of data we can pull now while it's still warm. When to think about what have we learned moving forward to thinking about Gen Alpha. And I think I was thinking about this around LGBT identity. Of course, this is very dependent on where somebody lives in the world, right? So if they're living in a major city or rural area of this country, a different country, I think that, my questions are things like, is leading with your queerness as important to Gen Alpha as it has been to other generations, right?
Hmm.
Maybe you want to lead with your love of X-Men instead, or whatever it is for that person. Maybe they are the person who just happens to have queer identities, but it's not set up front and center for them. And I think that marketers think that it's huge. It's a lot of it. There's a lot of assumptions happening, which is natural when you have such huge numbers of people that you're trying to reach. But I think that,
Really quickly, I want to interject to make sure that I'm understanding what I think is a really important underlying point of what you're saying, which is before we shift our focus inevitably
yeah.
from Gen Z to Gen Alpha, we
Mhm.
also have to deconstruct how we craft that focus. Like
Absolutely.
it's not just like, we said hello Gen Z and hello Gen Alpha. It's like, wait, should we even be handshaking for this new group, right? Which is a really
Absolutely.
sort of rough analogy. That's really
Yeah. And I'll just like finish up my thought really quick is I think
yeah.
that's what is most resonant for Gen Z, and whatever group of person, right? Is that what's most resonant? And I think there's not just one answer for brands. It's what does your brand offer and how is that within that context resonant for this group of people, right? Is it Metamucil? Is it a Labubu? I mean, those are very different objects that we're talking about. As far as I understand, serve really different purposes, right? And so,
Gosh, they will drop a Metamucil Labubu
I
tomorrow.
don't know. One day, we'll see.
Orange.
But I think that it's important to like for ourselves and to remind our clients, whoever they are, that to remain intersectional, to remain looking at people as multifaceted, as having many parts, and that for each person, even though they've been recruited, we'll say to a market research study, that like even though they fit all the requirements and yes, they should be in the study, yes, they made it in, it doesn't mean that the thing that you recruited them for is the thing that's most important to them. And I would say that's true. And I think that we're thinking not just about attributes, but about how I think a major thing that Gen Z has taught us is that are very self-aware at their own self-branding. They understand brands. They've always had the internet to do research, always.
Yeah.
And I think that, it's important to think of ourselves as much as consumer advocates, as much as we are teaching brands to be allies and align with the consumers they're interested in.
This is really fascinating to me. I just want to make a quick side note because there's a client of mine from a PR standpoint that I'm fairly obsessed with because they've basically sort of versus doing better market research, they're reinventing the methodologies behind it. So instead of doing a better focus group, it's like do focus groups speak to these people instead of like better wording questions? They're like, why would you have it be all words at all when you should be using memes as the means to get prompts from them? So it's like there's a huge market research innovation opportunity in what you're describing and in that kind of work. I do want to get into, all right, so I want y'all to, it's time for a little role play. You are brand marketers, right? And you're curious about Gen Alpha. Your attention is not there yet, as we've clearly established, right? What are the biggest questions that you would have as a brand marketer with $1 billion budget looking into this generation as a growth opportunity? And as you consider the questions that you would have about that generation, how should queerness figure into that? Is that going to be, if we're now at a place where Gen Z is 20% LGBTQ and we can maybe assume that number is going to grow, does that question have to be paramount in what you're looking at first? Or will it be other questions that sort of rise to the top in terms of what you would dive into?
For me, the question would be, how do I, as a brand marketer, pitch to you Gen Alpha person? Because if you take the reality that it's happening now, but it's going to get so much more advanced in the next, they're saying AGI is going to be here by early 2026, right? So if you imagine that Gen Alpha folk are able to be their own studio director, producer, casting director, production designer, blah, 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 the whole gamut, and produce their own content under their own brand, under their own steam on the platform they choose to distribute it over, or start their own distribution channel. And obviously that gets shared and it builds an audience and it might go viral. And suddenly you find yourself with, a 12-year-old, for want of a better term, Steven Spielberg, that has a bunch of followers, rather than a brand reaching out to them and saying, we'd like you to join our thing. Flip that on its head is, how do I, as a brand, support your thing?
Well, this is
And
really
tell me what
interesting
you
because
need.
we just talked about don't see them as a consumer first, see them as a person first, but now we're taking it further because we're looking at them as a producer also, right?
Yeah,
So, and which is I don't think we've ever looked at it as at an entire generation as producers.
right.
That's insane and very interesting. So superseding questions of queerness is like, what are they sort of projecting and putting out into the world as content, and how can you let them take the lead that way? Teach them well and let them lead the way. What yet again? That's really interesting. Josh, Anthony, what would your first big question be in terms of looking at this generation? Because Nick, I did not expect you to. I know tech is huge. I know I've started to say that AI is part of the conversation, the way that Sex in the City, like New York, is a character in the show, right? Yes, major character, and it still sort of caught me off guard that you said it. What's the first thing that y'all are looking at if you're this marketer?
I'll go ahead. I find this to be a really difficult challenge because I think that in a lot of ways, you know, there's no one sort of cardinal question that comes to mind, but what I do think would be really important to understand is what authenticity means to them, and where do they derive meaning. And the reason why I think that those two things are really critical is that um, Gen Z already are ace at understanding and detecting BS. They're very keen on authenticity, realness, I think that part of why influencer campaigns and the idea of creators is so resonant with Gen Z, especially, is because they want to hear it from the source. How did it work? Why is it great? What did it deliver and surface for that creator in terms of benefits? And so for me, it would be really, what are the drivers of meaningfulness to you in your life? Um, but I think beyond that, one of the key things that's really critical, or a critical component to how I would like look at Gen Alpha, is I think I want to go back to what Anthony said as it relates to whether or not queerness is this foremost identity, this identity that needs to kind of be at the fore of everything. Um, I think more and more I kind of see the value in, and not dimming it, but making it sort of secondary to a more cardinal interest. The reason why is because I think it in so many ways is helpful with normalizing. And in a lot of ways, just with a lot of the work that we're doing in terms of LGBTQ plus equity, we found that the best inroads are when we sort of pair somebody's queerness with something that is common, something, well, I want to change that phrasing, but pairing somebody's queerness with something that somebody who is non-LGBTQ can understand, gravitates towards, or who could share that said identity, whether that's being a lover of music, or somebody who likes to woodwork on the weekends, like really common threads that show us as a universal community. That I think is a really big antidote to a lot of the disparate communities and difficulty with connection that I feel like a lot of youth have today. And that's anecdotal, that's from my perspective, but I think that would be my answer.
So I think that you and Nick have sort of interesting connected answers. I think that, Josh, you're sort of speaking to the muse in terms of meaning, right? And obviously like queerness has an option of being that, but it's not the primary question. It's where do you get meaning from? Nick, in this technologically advanced society, the question that the marketer should ask is like, what will these people be putting out into the world based on that muse? And like, how does queerness find its way from the muse to the final finished product of what they are doing as publishers themselves? Which is pretty interesting. I sort of see a connection there. Anthony, what do you think your first it sounds like queerness fits into the first questions that Nick and Josh would have. Are you in a similar boat?
I think it really depends on the brand and the marketer to think about what's most. And I think that instead of authenticity, I really like to think of resonance, like a kind of sound, a vibe, if you will, that really gets at you, or something that's resonating with you. And I think that language is a really big part of that. And I think both of the other panelists are on that same page. I mean, I think we can agree, and maybe I don't think I'm the only one, but like queer culture is interesting. Queer culture is iconic. Queer culture is cool. But like, is queer culture only gender and sexuality? And I think that I'm guessing most of you would say, no, it's so many other things. And so I think that that viewpoint is when we need to carry into over talking to clients, marketers, and advertisers, that to have queer culture, I mean, culture is so big. But I think that, what I'm really interested in is how young people want the conversation to go. We're in a world where everyone can be their own brand. Everyone's creating culture all the time. I'm consuming young people's culture all the time. I think it's cool. I think it's fascinating. And I think marketers and advertisers would agree. But, like, if we take something like the Gen Z stare, which everyone was talking about in the last couple weeks, and you just kind of it's a vacant stare, why are young people at the coffee shop looking at me like this? But, like, would a resonant, like, commercial would be for me to communicate with that stare as an older person? Like, no, that would seem, disingenuous, and then making an affect something that someone can buy. So I guess what I'm curious about is how young people want the conversation to go, how they want to be talked to, and how they want to be talked about. And I don't think that's always using a bunch of slang, because that might just come across as pandering. And I don't, and I think it's when we go into any culture, like as an anthropologist, as an ethnographer myself, what is it in language when you like, what is this community, like intra-community conversations, what are the terms, what are the words, and that's interest in culture. And I don't think that means that those words have to show up because I'm not in that community, but am I fluent in that conversation and in those languages? Not yet.
So
And I
you
think there should be a curiosity to know how young people talk to each other versus how they want brands to be in conversation with them.
But
you
and
segued very neatly into the next question that I'm going to have, and I actually kind of want you to reference it first. But really quick, I want to acknowledge something very, very important that you said from your foundation, because if the question is like, what is the first big thing a marketer should ask themselves, and you said, look at yourself. So I think that one of the biggest issues that we've had, and where we get a lot of the problems with this stuff, is that people sort of go, oh, I see pride. Pride is big for you. I'll make it mine somehow. I'm reading a lot of multicultural cases right now that are about the Hispanic community, and it's just like, I see Hispanic Heritage Month. I'll make my way into it. I think your ability to breathe and say, before I even do that, I am a toilet paper company. I am a bank. What right do I have to explore and to like any of these communities and find a sense of self beforehand is really important. I do want to, like I said, you segued really neatly into the next question, which is that I had, which was what will young LGBTQ people be screaming to marketers that those marketers need to hear? And will it involve pride? Will they care about pride? Will it involve politics? Will they even care about politics as much? Anthony, the way that you frame this up is really interesting because it's not only a question of what will Gen Alpha be screaming at them, but in what language will they be screaming it, which is really interesting. So do you mind sort of like delving into that question first?
Yeah, I mean, I talk a little bit. I know that Nick had some things to add as far as I'm
Yeah,
inferring
sorry,
from the
Nick. I
facial.
didn't complete. I mean to
But
steam. I got
no,
real
no, I think it's
inspired.
good. I'll just kind of reframe it, and then I feel like confident that Nick can take it on after this.
I feel the same.
Yes. But I think that I don't know if pride is the right framework anymore. I know that's just like destroying all kinds of bajillion, I'm not a numbers person, bajillions of dollars that are invested in like rainbow Listerine and rainbow toilet paper and rainbow Metamucil or whatever. Like I don't I think that one big thing we've learned from all generations is that like I don't know that the like rainbowification is as interesting or as palatable or fits the vibe anymore. I don't know if young people even think having pride, as in PRIDE, is something that people are interested in anymore. So I think again, what is the framework that we're having? Like, it seems very like hallmarkification. Like this month happens this and this month happens that. And I understand we're talking about bajillions of people with bajillions amounts of dollars, and we have to be able to slice it efficiently. But I think that the wrench I would throw in that is pride even the right framework to be using for people of these younger generations. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Well,
Nick,
and I just saw something in the last couple of weeks where it went viral of a woman on TikTok who was talking to her Gen Alpha kids about coming out, and the kids didn't understand that concept. Like, why do you need to come out?
so I didn't mean to laugh so loud, but that is hilarious.
Right?
Yeah.
And to go back to your question, Graham, you're saying, what will Gen Alpha queer people be screaming at? But I don't think they'll be screaming at brands because I don't think they have to. I think the being very secure in identity at a much earlier age. I mean, I have both Gen Alpha and Gen Z people in my family. Old heads on young shoulders like I've never seen in my entire fucking life. It's extraordinary. And because of the power of the technology they're using and their adoption of it, and because they're younger, their minds are spongier, technical abilities. I think there'll be more of the ones potentially calling the shots. And also advocating for, well, why are you only talking to me? Why aren't you talking to the people around me? Because it's not just me, this isolated, or me and my gang, or whatever it might be. So I think it's going to be a much better balanced dialogue than a monologue from marketing to Gen Alpha of, this is what we think you want, test and learn, blah, 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 roll it out, scale it, make it go viral. I'm hoping, and maybe I'm just being a ridiculous optimist and idealist here, but I'm hoping that Gen Alpha is the gen that kind of cracks the code for power of the people, literally. I mean, Josh, you were talking in our greet session the other day about, you know, Gen Alpha's outsized impact within the family. Like, that used to be called pester power, but now it's decision making. And you know, the role of the kid in the table and the traditional familial hierarchy also changing. And these are the outliers, as opposed to the patterns, that I think we should be looking for, because everything I've seen the last couple of weeks, particularly being deep into it to prepare for this, is talking about the same thing. It's the same narrative, which is A, decoding Gen Alpha language, B, that they are digital natives, no surprises there, C, that they're going to be more activist, not sure about that yet, I need to see further studies, and mental health and inclusiveness. But the moment you go beneath that surface, onto some communities and message boards and all the rest of it, parents are telling a very different story about what they're encountering in schools on a day-to-day basis with bigotry and hate that's either, you know, inspired just by what we're experiencing as a country right now, or it's around consumption, as in, if you don't have a Stanley Cup, I don't want to sit with you.
Josh, I would love to get, before I get to the last question, I would love your thoughts on that specifically. I think Nick sort of queued it up, so I want to ask it, which is like, you know, in addition to like what they'll be screaming, any more thoughts on like how they're screaming it now through their families?
Yeah, I mean, I think Nick is spot on. You know, the one thing that I think is difficult for me to like kind of rack my head around is this idea that young people will be in control of the narrative of commerce and like just kind of being and the reason why is because as much billions and trillions of, you know, spending power that Gen Alpha is going to attain sooner than later, the market caps of those organizations and brands marketing towards them is doubly so. And so I really think that there's still going to, I believe that there's still very much going to be a very traditional dialogue between, and maybe dialogue is the thing, maybe it hasn't been a dialogue historically, but I do think that there's going to be a dialogue between youth consumers and brands who market to them. However, I think in a lot of ways, it's going to change in terms of what expectations are, and what meets the muster for Gen Alpha today. I think, you know, going back to the concepts of authenticity and resonance and the idea of pride, as Anthony so eloquently put forward, you know, I agree. I don't think that it's a framework that works today. And I think that Gen Alpha, when it comes to understanding and how they're represented in brand messaging, you know, or how LGBTQ plus people are represented in brand messaging, they're going to expect more nuanced approaches. They're going to be able to call out rainbow washing with ease, and they're going to be able to take their money elsewhere towards brands that actually take the effort, time, and desire to create nuanced messaging, create nuanced ecosystems of messaging that really are attuned to who they are and represent who they are in that multidimensional sense that we've been talking about throughout. I think that where I see um, that's where I see things going. As for who's screaming, I don't know. My neurodivergence can't handle screams, so hopefully it's a dim scream. But I do think that there's definitely going to be discourse had, and I think a lot of it's going to be about not a list of demands, but a real honest reckoning with how brands have in so many ways tokenized groups as a means to understand and market to them.
So
And then, sorry.
before we even get to the core of who Gen Alpha is, what y'all have laid out is just so many different areas of exploration, right? Like we didn't even have to define them. We know that their family unit is different. We know that their language is different. We know that the means of researching them will change. We know that their inspiration will change. We know that their means of self-identification will change. I would like to wrap with, because sadly I knew that we'd get to the point where it's like at the end we can go on for like another hour, but we do have to wrap this, and I want to wrap it in an actionable way. And I'm going to challenge everyone to try to like wrap this in 30 seconds, which, knowing that there's all these points of entry, and also I think it's so important, Anthony, the point that you made about like the need for marketers to look at themselves too is also changing and shifting, right? Like, that they need to like assert something about their own value before they sort of go into any of this. What is what is the first thing you would tell to these brand marketers or to an agency leader in terms of like a behavioral thing they could do tomorrow to start delving into this and stay ahead before the focus shifts from Z to Alpha? Who has some behavioral advice that they can quickly share? Everyone's going to go, but
Yeah, I'll go first.
yeah.
The first thing I'd say is the past is prologue. These things have been said about generations for decades. They talk different than us. They identify different than us. They look different than us. They're doing different things. Obviously, technology has accelerated that. And there are elements of looking at Gen Alpha that are vastly different from someone like myself, someone older than myself. The other thing I would say is take a look at what's happening outside of the US when it comes to Gen Alpha. For example, I was just talking to an Australian cultural anthropologist, and they're floating that social media is banned in Australia up until the age of 16. Whether that will fly or not and get adopted, yet to be said. I wouldn't want to hazard a guess at that, but that needs to be in the conversation as well. Is what if parental controls and governmental support for protecting Gen Alpha from the onslaught of advertising and marketing and treating you as a consumer? What if it does come to pass that you don't have access to that until people are of the age that these groups are saying is okay for them to experience social media and AI? Those are
So
my
the
points.
the quick hit behavioral stuff I'm taking from that is, one, when you start, make sure you look at historical patterns.
Yep.
Two, when you start, to make sure that you're looking at it from a global perspective versus national, because that's going to inform a better look at this generation. So both of those are things you could put at the top of a brief behavior wise.
Yes.
That's awesome. All right. Some other specific things we could tell folks to do if they're going to jump into this.
I can go. Um, I think the big thing we've learned from Gen Z and Gen Z people, queer people included, is that Gen Z is number one researchers. They know how to do research about your company. They're looking for transparency, that the brand, they want to see not only that your advertisements, your socials reflect the people that they know and see every day, but that those people with those identities are also working at your companies. And so I think it's, less about this kind of hallmark style, like this is this month and this month is that month, which is also true. I think that, it's like a self-reflection. I think that resonant communication requires brand and professional self-reflection. It's like, are we actually doing what we say we're doing, or are we only putting out ads that look like we say what we're doing? But are we also employing Gen Z? Are we employing a very wide diversity of Gen Z folks? Are we giving those people a seat at the table? And I think that's something that Gen Alpha, I'm assuming, has really learned from Gen Z, like who's at the table and where am I going to put my time and my money?
the behavioral thing I'm hearing is that they should probably reconsider the Gen Alpha consumer journey and make sure that their brand is saying what it needs to say at every point in that journey.
Yeah, it's not just the brand itself, but like the company as
Yeah,
well
yeah.
as what they're putting out there.
Well, I think I look at I think that younger people look at brand very broadly now. It's like we used to sort of go, well, brand is advertising, it's media, it's whatever, and like the consumer sort of goes, yeah. Also, it's your political policies. I'll decide what brand is. Like so I'm just letting you know that I sort of look at it in a weird holistic way because I think younger people might. That's not to make myself seem younger. Josh, finally, you get to tell these people to do one thing behaviorally to delve into this. What do you want them doing in action?
I think this is kind of aligned with what Anthony was saying, but I think align your, extrinsic sort of tenets and what you preach through your marketing with how you run internally. I think in a lot of ways it's important to match those two. I've seen a lot of times that there's discrepancy between, values of inclusivity, diversity, that aren't really matched internally, and that shows in the work. Again, because the fact of the matter is you don't have the right people at the table to shore up the work that you need to really match what you're preaching externally. And then the other thing I would say is as we look at a culture and a youth cohort that's frankly less and less white, I do think that there is an opportunity to understand how whiteness and just the platform of whiteness that really dictates a lot in our world, how it's imbued in the day to day, both internally but also how you're messaging. Maybe you'll need to look at different messaging, different calibers of messaging. Using different types of phrasing and words that are just endemically more resonant for groups that are non-white. I think that that's going to play a big role, especially as Gen Alpha might be a generation where being white is a minority. I think that that'll play a key role.
So what I'm hearing behaviorally is put intersectionality at the top of the brief, and then also to do an integrity check. Even I think it's even more rigorous than authenticity to say, make a list of what you say, make a list of what you do, literally like check those lists to make sure, like fucking Santa Claus, I'm checking this list twice. Do these things match up? I think all of this is incredibly helpful. And I think anyone listening to this would have a lot of things that they could do tomorrow. So thank you so much. We are getting near time, so I just want to be mindful of that and just invite everyone very quickly to tell me where you could be reached. I'll start with Anthony because you're at the top of my screen.
You can find me on LinkedIn at AAnthonyPhD. You can also email me at aanthonyphd@gmail.com. That's like Anthony spelled with two A's plus a PhD at gmail.com.
Hell yes. Josh. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. You can reach me at joshweaver.com. You can also visit my website at joshweaver.com.
Fantastic. And Nick.
You can reach me at my email, which is nick@cultureland.co, CULTURE, cultureland.co.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for all of your expertise. I sort of set it up where I was like, oh, here's my wish is that like everyone overlaps in certain ways and then goes in wildly different directions. You delivered. I think it was a fun and wild ride for the listener as well. And you give us so much to think about. And I hope that anyone who's listening understands that like any one of these different aspects could be a starting point. This is not one of those topics where we're behind. You can get ahead by embracing this sort of understanding and insight. I want to invite people to follow Do the Work at Do the Work on X and on Instagram primarily, and then also dothework.com, DOTHEWERQ.com. If you found this, you know how to spell it. I want you to encourage people who are watching on YouTube to like and subscribe, and I want to invite people to be volunteers if they're interested, or if you want to be a part of one of these conversations, reach out to me. I'm Graham Nolan at gmail.com. I want to thank our amazing guests for their fantastic insights. I want to thank our audience for watching live and streaming. I want to thank our incredible programming and production team for making this happen to begin with. Thank you all so much for everything you provided, in which I just want to wrap on, I think is a pretty I like the optimism as someone who holds tickets now to the Radical Optimism Tour. Let's embrace it. I think that as of last week, I think there's a lot of things to look forward to, and I think that you pointed towards a lot of hope and a lot of inspiration as the undercurrent of all you discussed. So thank you for being positive in a very realistic way. See
Thank you,
y'all.
Greg.
Thank you.